Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome, and joining me this week to share the 10 best spiritual books that influenced him the most on his life journey is rebel entrepreneur and wisdom activist Dr. Elvir Causevic, who has roamed the halls of the Ivy League, Wall Street and Silicon Valley as a professor, an engineer, an investment banker, a people coach, and an earth lawyer. After teaching at Yale and building 3 successful brain medical device companies, Elvir now runs a boutique investment bank in San Francisco in parallel with Upend, a new school of living wisdoms. He's the author of numerous scientific and business publications and a named inventor on over 30 patents globally. And his main quest, aside from supporting a number of environmental and indigenous people's causes, is to refresh our collective memory of our ancient wisdoms so that we can each live well and enjoy each other and cherish our earth. Dr. Elvir Causevic, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
So tell me about your relationship with books and how easy or how challenging it was to put together a list of just 10.
Yeah. Look, it's the relationship with books in some sense is really a relationship with the authors, right? The book is just a medium through which the author was inspired, who figured something out, who got a spiritual download, who had a vision, who has a story to tell, couldn't help but tell the story. And then they tell a beautiful story, an inspired story. And it's meant to, move people. So for me, it's really a relationship with the author that I engaged in with the books, and getting only 10 for somebody like me who reads a lot of books was incredibly difficult.
So what criteria did you use then? How did you pick the 10?
I basically looked at like which books would I know off the top of my head, right? Rather than like going to my bookshelf. So I was tempted to go to the bookshelf. I was tempted to impress you and your audience with all of these wonderful books that I've read and they're so difficult to know this. But then I thought, no, that doesn't make sense. Which are the ones that one, I remember off the top of my head right away. And then 2, which are the ones that I've gone back to and read multiple times. And then I read books, I know when I pick up a pen to read a book, that's a good sign. When I take a little, because I travel a lot, right? So I read on the road. So if I have like the little napkin from the airplane as the bookmark, because I run out of bookmarks. And then when I go back and underline, different things in the same book, those are kind of the criteria that I use. So the ones that look like, you shouldn't show anybody, that there are like pages are covered and there's a bunch of little bookmarks that are, a toothpick and a napkin from a bar and a piece of paper from a hotel. Those are the ones that I know, like, okay, I got to go back and read this. That's how I pick them.
So if you're writing, underlining and writing little notes in the book, and you go back to reread that book later, do you ever find yourself looking at a note and going, oh, I wish I hadn't written that note because that's no longer relevant?
Absolutely. Depends on the time, right? And I think I also measure kind of my own spiritual progress or decline. Doesn't matter. Change, I should say. Spiritual.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one of the books I'm rereading recently, the Universal Tree, and I'm going back and saying, I was so smart. When I read this the first time, I got these things, and I'm reading it the second time. Thank God I have the notes. because it's just like I'm not drawing these conclusions like I did before.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's start with the first book on your list, and that is As We Have Always Done, Indigenous Freedom Through Radical Resistance by Leanne Betasamasaki Simpson. That's a hard name to pronounce. And this was published in 2017. What was it about this book that impressed you so much?
Most importantly was the courage of the author. I mean, she just has, I'm Bosnian, and we have this little saying in Bosnia, like, she has no hair on her tongue. Like, she doesn't have, like, she's not mincing her words, right? She is just incisive and just has the courage to say it like she sees it. And like an equal opportunity offender, right? She's a Canadian Native American, and she's so unapologetic about being from her tribe, and she talks about colonialism in such direct way, without any soppiness, there's no guilt, blame. The way I read it, at least, it's like, okay, here's what happened, and here's the impact that it had on everybody, and here's what we need to do about it now. And she talks about her children and how her children are perceiving their indigenous culture. And one of the things that really surprised me is when she talked about allyship, that she could imagine herself creating allyship with people of color, but not so much with colonialists, and not now. And that was courageous and powerful. Jarring for me, right? I'm a transplant, right? I come from my own indigenous culture, but I pass for white in America and Canada. And I've no doubt had privileges, whether I knew it or not. I never paid attention to them like most white people do. But I'm an immigrant, right? So I always thought that as an immigrant, I studied the culture. I've been here 30 plus years, and I love this country and the opportunities and how it takes on its struggles. This was a step up in, okay, it was a call to say, let's take this the next level up. And think deeply and take action consistent with how do we make things right in the indigenous community and the relationship between the indigenous community and the colonial community.
Did she say, you talked about her children? I mean, is her children's relationships and thoughts and feelings different than hers?
Yeah, because she kind of, from what I understood from the book, she was separated from her own culture and then found it again. And whereas her children had the benefit of her being re-immersed into her own culture and growing up kind of both, indigenous and with her traditional culture and the modern culture, and how they're noticing things, but they're not freaking out about them as much as she is. So it gave a sense of hope to me.
Was it a surprise to you what she shared in the book?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it. I mean, of course, I knew. I've been studying, Native American and other indigenous cultures in the world for 20 plus years. But just the depth at the human level for her, what it meant. She goes, basically, she breaks into containers. So she says, okay, here's a container that we all talk about. There's the colonialists and the indigenous people. Okay, but it's actually a deeper container. And then this is the impact that colonialism had on us, the erasure of culture, right? So it's the erasure of culture that we see, obviously. But she was also talking about the erasure of language, what it meant, and the erasure of self-confidence, and the purposeful or accidental erasure of kind of being at a very deep level, and the sense of belonging, and then the coping with injustice. And then I liked how she went after some of the political structures in the indigenous community that she's in, how they are, anti-LGBTQ, even in the indigenous culture. So they kind of picked up some of the leaders in the indigenous culture that she calls out in the book have picked up the colonial ways, even though they live in the indigenous cultures and they work and talk and behave like somebody from indigenous cultures. They actually are not true to their own indigenous roots.
Interesting.
That's why I say equal opportunity offender.
Yeah, exactly.
Encourage the beautiful writing, and just the courage to just say it, to just name it, to call it. It raised the degree. It required from me a different level of courage in talking to my own kids and facing my own life.
Yeah, indeed. Book number 2 is a book that's been hailed as a classic of Jewish spirituality ever since its original publication, and it's been read by thousands of people seeking meaning in modern life. The book is The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel, and it was published in 1951.
Another beautiful book, and what stands out for me is it turns the concept of spirituality on its head. I'm not Jewish, but I really, really love this book. It just spoke to me as if I was Jewish. And one of the main distinctions he draws is the concept of spirituality in place, through place, versus spirituality in time. So communing with the spirit in time, and Sabbath being more of an issue of time, not ceremony, not activity, not place, right? It's not about, the synagogue or the church. It's not about, hell or heaven, or kind of, it's not spatially motivated spirituality. He describes it in sense of spending time with the spirit, and how the people who gave us the Sabbath and who put the first cultural underpinnings around Sabbath and the holy day, right? It's in Islam, it's Friday, and Judaism, it's Saturday, and Christianity, it's Sunday, and in other religions, it's at different times and days and such. But this concept of being with spirit in time and spending time, very different than the mechanical motion or the particular ceremony, or the lighting of the candle, or the fasting, or the going to church, or going to synagogue, going to the mosque, going to whatever temple, and saying all of those. Don't confuse the motion with the point. And the point is to be in time.
Yeah. I've heard that once before. Yes, and a lot of that has been lost.
Yeah.
It's about, praying, communing with God, going to church, as you say, doing something or not doing something, but being with yourself and going within. And
that's right.
Yeah.
And being with spirit and creating time to be in spirit, right? That's the experiencing the sacred in the realm of time.
Yeah. Mm. Book number 3, you just mentioned earlier, The Universal Tree and the Four Birds. Is that 2 books?
One book.
One book by Ibn Arabi. That was published in 2006 and translated by Angelo Jeffrey.
The particular book that I'm reading is published in 2006. The original book was published in 1100.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's a very old book. And it's,
Amazon doesn't have that copy.
Yes, the particular book I was referring is a particular translation, but the original Arabic version. Ibn Arabi is a famous Sufi scholar, and he's written hundreds and hundreds of books. And this particular one is also about what does it mean, what is essential to being a human being, and the relationship of humans to the source. And what I love about it is it obviously comes from the Islamic Sufi tradition, but it doesn't talk about any particular marks of Sufism or Islam. It talks about just the human relationship with the divine, similar to the Sabbath book. And it explains things through these 4 birds: the eagle, the ring dove, the crow, and the anka, like a griffon kind of a bird. And it basically goes through, if you will, almost you could map it onto the 4 realms, right? The physical, the emotional, the intellectual, and the spiritual realm. And it talks in such a beautiful way that the language is incredibly hard to translate, from what I understand from the translators, because of the nuances of Arabic and the rhythms, the 2-3-2 rhythm. It's a little bit like translating haiku. Like that, but this particular translation I enjoyed very much because it tries to keep the cadence. So most of the book is poems, And it's the kind of book to read multiple times. And it's absolutely not the kind of book to engage your brain with. It's because if you try to make sense of it logically, you'll get lost because he draws these parallels and analogies. And there's a commentary. So the book is short. The commentary is long. I mean, the whole book is, 150 pages or something like that. It's an absolutely beautiful read. And what I would advise is read it once, just go through it. Just mechanically just go through it, do the best you can. Then read the commentary, which is beautiful. And then go back and read it again now that you have the commentary. And when the second time you read it, it touches you in different parts of your body. So the beauty of it is that if you can skip the brain and just read it and just absorb it, it starts making sense at a whole different level about our relationship with the source and how it's veiled from us in a way that we're in this constant process of discovery.
Book number 4, much admired man, Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender by David Hawkins, MD. How many people have read his books? You hear about it so often. What was it about this particular book?
I trained as an engineer early in my career. I have a doctorate in electrical engineering. And what I loved about this book is it does the unthinkable, which is it puts numbers to emotions and puts emotions to a scale. So if you have like an engineering mind, so if you have a kind of an accounting mind, an engineering mind, a legal mind, and all this emotional stuff is too much fluffy and too much, foo-foo-la-la for you, this gives you a nice scale, 1 to 1,000. And it lines up the emotions very nicely. And it uses just such beautiful language. I have this book in writing, but I also have it as an audiobook. And it's probably the one audiobook I listen to the most. Even in shopping, you can just pick a chapter on courage. And if it doesn't inspire you, it's just so beautiful, so simple. Words you can understand and connections you can make, like, oh yeah, they just totally make sense. Every chapter you read in that book, especially as it goes through the emotions, right? So it goes through, shame and guilt and pride and kind of the lower emotions and the lower energy. And then it says, okay, courage gives it a score of 200. That's the breaking energy, where you break from the negative energy sucking kind of down in the mud energies. Courage is the one that breaks you, and it gives you like a very simple recipe how to take it in small steps. And then once you have courage, then you go to neutrality, acceptance, right, all the way up to love and peace and spirituality. And it's just such a logical, nice, easy to understand step that doesn't require any religion, doesn't require doesn't require incense, doesn't require sage, doesn't require anything, and I found it beautiful as a gift to people who are not spiritual, religious, and like that, who don't believe in any of this stuff, but they really get it. And it's not psychobabble, right? It's not this new age psychology. It's just very simple and grounded. There's even some experiments. I'm a little grumpy that he takes liberty with some of the, I come from an engineering background, but I built medical device companies, right? So we do clinical trials and get FDA approvals. He takes a little liberty, which he shouldn't as an MD, with measurements of some of these energies. But nonetheless, whether you buy that or not, it's irrelevant. The scale of emotions, it's just so practical and so beautiful.
Did you find that it helped you let go of a number of emotions? And
absolutely, the letting go is just a mechanism, right? It's just a mechanism. What the bigger value for me is this stair-stepping of emotions that when I catch myself in guilt, blame, anger, frustration, I know the place to go to is courage. It's not about getting stuck in these. It's just having the courage to just say the things as they are and see the things for what they are without having to tell anybody, just for myself. And then just that act of courage to engage in seeing what's really going on in my emotional body is what gets me out of the loop of, pride, anger, shame, guilt, and it puts me up into the acceptance and generosity and at least neutrality, right? If I can't do any better. But then moves to love. And I can just see as I swing through my day up and down, I can just see when I'm off track, and it's like a simple recipe to get back on track that doesn't require religious belief.
Yeah, very useful. So book number 5 has been described as a searing diary that offers one of the fullest, most shocking accounts yet of the Soviet prison camp system. The book is 7,000 Days in Siberia by Carlo Stagna, and it was published in 1988.
Yeah, it's a book I shouldn't have read when I read it. My mom was reading the book, and I was secretly reading it. I couldn't have been 14. It is not a book for a 14-year-old. It's not a book for anybody. It's a hard book, but it's like almost like the deeper version of Viktor Frankl in some sense. Everybody's read Viktor Frankl, but Viktor Frankl, he obviously writes beautifully, and so many people know his book. But he goes fast over some things to get to the point. A man's search for meaning. And here, Carlos Steiner doesn't, right? So he really lets you simmer. It's a big book, right? It's, a couple, 1,000 pages, right? It's a book. It's a commitment. And he just, it's almost like in a mechanical way, he just describes, and this is what happened, and then this is what happened, and then they put us here, and they did this, and then they said this, and here's what the other prisoners did, and here's how this happened, here's how that happened. And it really showed in kind of an unemotional way, without any philosophy and without any sappiness, just showed kind of what can happen, right? In Soviet Russia that started, it's almost like the sequel of, I don't know if it doesn't make sense, maybe, but it's almost like Animal Farm, Viktor Frankl, and then Animal Farm, and then this book that just says in a very kind of dry, journalistic almost way, without horror, right? He's not trying to tug on your emotions. He's literally just trying to figure out what happened and how, and he does it through kind of a dry documenting, and then you get to draw your own conclusions. So I had a chance to reread it later in life. And it's an important book for today's, if you think you want to live in an authoritarian regime, left, right, or whatever, right? I don't care if you're pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit or pro this or pro that. Just read this book, and it'll really help you vote smart next time around. Whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Tory, whatever you are, Labor, it doesn't matter. I would suggest reading this book before you vote for the guy who says the right thing. That you want to hear.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, what attracted you to it at the age of 14?
I don't know. We had a bunch of, my dad joked with my mom all the time that she bought books. We had, in the old days, they had people come into the door, right? And he always messed with my mom that she bought book by color and by the meter, right? Or by the foot. And then she would tell the salesman, this never happened, but this is the story that he tells. Give me a meter of red because I need it because it fits over here. And then I need another meter and a half. What do you got that's 3 feet of blue? And we got Pearl Bach, and we got whatever, Tolstoy, or we got Kafka or whatever. So in one of these book buyings, she ended up with this book. It was, I have a 12-year-old son. He's just attracted to I think it's the reality of it, right? That attracted me to it back then. And then later in life, it's the what humans are capable of doing to each other in a mechanical way.
Yeah. Did you? I mean, you said that your mum was reading the book too. Did you discuss it with her?
No, I was reading it.
She didn't know.
No, she would have never let me read a book like that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're going to take a short break now. We'll be back with more from Dr. Elvir Causevic in a few moments. Stay tuned.
OMTimes TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting OMTimes Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit Sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back, Dr. Elvir Causevic. Right, let's move on to book number 6, which was written by one of the greatest Bosnian writers of the 21st century, Death and the Dervish, Writings from an Unbound Europe by Meir Selimovic. I don't know if I've pronounced that right.
Close enough, excellent.
Tell me about this book.
Look, this was required reading. I'm Bosnian, so this was required reading when I was growing up. And I hated reading it back then because it just talked about the Ottoman Empire and all of this stuff. And I was into, girls and sports and tech and, like that. But I reread it later in life. And it's very similar to the first book we discussed, which is basically the relationship between the occupier and the occupied. And this was about an indigenous Bosnian man dealing with the Turkish in the Ottoman Empire occupation in Bosnia and having to make really difficult choices. Is he Bosnian? Is he Ottoman? Whose side is he going to be on? If he makes the wrong choice, he loses his wealth and prestige and family. If he makes the wrong choice, to support the Ottoman Empire, then he loses his pride and his friends, and like that. So it's a moral dilemma that describes a lot of what I learned about in other indigenous cultures. Right? How do you deal with a constant occupier and this power position where you feel powerless, and then you have allegiance to your own country and to your own culture and to your own family. And others, and it's seen in times of war, but also in times of, if there's such a thing, peaceful occupation, right? When it wasn't war. It's written beautifully. It's won every possible award short of a Nobel Prize, and it's a book I would highly recommend because it's very different. Comes at it from a very different angle. It's not the same kind of book you've read 100 times.
So you had to read it at school, but then you went back and read it later. And what was the difference between your reactions?
I just didn't get the depth of colonialism, right, and imperialism that my people were under. We lived in, we were free. We lived in Yugoslavia at the time. You could travel anywhere in the world. We weren't, stuck behind the Iron Curtain. We had the Olympics in 1984. Sarajevo was, U2 came to town, and I don't know, all these movie stars and everybody else. I was, my family went all over the place traveling. So we lived in the heyday, and I just thought this is just history, right? Who wants to bother with this stuff? But then this history caught up with us when we had the war. It wasn't maybe I probably read the book in 87, something like that, 88. we had the war in Bosnia in 92. Because of these things, the people who came after us, accused us of, of being Muslim and wanted to wipe us off the face of the earth because we're Muslims in Europe. And that, that didn't work for the Serbian nationalists.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I mean, the lessons that we're all getting, in culturalism and, we're one people, we're one race on one planet.
That's right. Some of that is discussed in the book. Also, in the death of the death and the dervish is also his own identity. Like, who is he and who are these other people? And there, some of the occupiers were nice people, and he got it. And some of the things that happened, like it's people always think it's black and white, and it's not black and white.
No, it's never black and white. Number 8. Let's move on to number 8. Shambhala, the sacred path of the warrior. But you're challenging me with all these names that I have difficulty pronouncing. Chogyam Trungpa.
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
That's the best I've heard it described in the Shambhala tradition. That that his name is. So he's one of the waves of people that brought Buddhism to America, and in the Shambhala tradition. And what I love about this particular book is it really dismantled a lot of the concepts of warrior that I learned in kind of the Western Europe sense of the word, right? And today's man, the idea that as a man, or even if you want to be successful in business as a woman, you read Lean In. Lean In is like what's it, Sheryl Sandberg. I did not like that book because it's like, okay, be a man. I have 3 daughters. That's not the advice I'm giving my daughters. The advice in that book, unlike in this book, is to be a warrior. It doesn't have to have anything to do with male, female, masculine, feminine, man, woman. It has to do with the spiritual qualities.
Yes.
And one of the things he talks about is this like a melancholy quality of a warrior, which I thought was really beautiful. That in the Jesuit traditions, right, they talk about others. Right, so that's a lot of what he talks about, Chogyam Trungpa, in his book, The Sacred Path of the Warrior. It's about the others, right? It's about being in service. It's about almost like being a channel from the sacred to the others, and you choose this path as a warrior. But what touched me about it that was so unusual is this idea of like a sadness in the warrior's heart, and the sadness coming from the world not being what it could be, and then the warrior looking to make the world be what it could be. What the warrior knows the world ought to be and should be and could be, and is getting the message from the divine about how the world ought to work. The other part I loved about the book is his sense of humor. It's a very funny book, and he tells these little stories, and he links the deep spiritual Buddhist teachings in a very accessible language. Right? It's super easy to read, beautiful to read, such beautiful language, nice sentence construction, easy. Going, but he links it to like the standard things in American culture. It even mentions Trump, even though the book was written a long time ago. But just this idea of like how you can be kind of ego driven or not, and all of that, and talks about it brings these Buddhist concepts kind of into the mainstream American culture, at least as it was in the 80s.
Now, I've just realised that I've actually skipped a book, so we'll go back to that one in a minute. First, I want to continue talking about Chogyam. He was obviously the source of much controversy.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that you change your perception of the book when you change your perception of the author?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned in the beginning, it's not about the book for me. It's about the author. I'll tell my kids, when you cross the street, don't look at the car, look at the driver. Right? If the driver doesn't look like he's stopping, the car doesn't matter, right? It's the driver. So I read this book before I knew about any of this that came out. And then I was, I visited the Shambhala Center here in San Francisco. His son got in trouble first. Publicly, about whatever it was. I forgot what it was, alleged to be alcohol and sexual abuse and whatever it was. And then I started digging into it, and then I found that Chogyam also had a controversy in his life, which I wasn't aware of when I read the book. So I reread the book with a higher degree of skepticism, and it's a different level. It's almost like you have a distinction between the book and the author. You have a distinction between within the author, like the human part of the author and the spiritual part of the author. And we see this with other controversial, Roman Polanski and von Trier, right? Lars von Trier, and other people, and even now these actors, right, that are Kevin Spacey and all these different people, and Bill Cosby and all of these folks. And the question is, how do you separate the art from the artist?
Yeah.
And to me, it's challenging. I don't think there's a formula. I think it's case by case basis. And whether something is a carefully manufactured persona, and behind that persona is a monster, or whether it's an artist with human failings, right? And it's really a topic of inquiry. And I think we each have to take it on our own. Here, to me, the message seemed. The message stands on its own, because it's a spiritual message that's thousands of years old. It's just retold in a particular way. So it's a little hard to taint the message of Buddhism with failings of the person who told the story. So to me, I still found in the second and third and fourth reading, I found the book very valuable.
Yeah. Well, it's the shadow side, isn't it? And we've all got it.
Yeah, it's also how much we give into it, and to what degree is our whole story the shadow, which we sold really well, or is there kind of a genuine good part of us, and we have a shadow part that's 10%, 20%, whatever, and then is that shadow part that I don't know, I didn't pay for coffee at my Starbucks, or is the shadow part that I inflicted serious pain on a minor. Like that, right? So it's not all crimes are the same.
No,
I think also, but I think it's anyway. It depends on what gets triggered in you, right? If you're a victim of sexual abuse, you'll react to Harvey Weinstein very different than somebody who's not a victim of sexual abuse.
Yeah. So let's go back to the book that I jumped, which was number 7, Fire in the Belly on Being a Man by Sam Keen, which was published in 1991.
So I'm super grumpy that I didn't get this book till I was like 40 something. I should have had this book as a teen or as a young man. It's another very courageous book, and cleverly written. He went to Harvard Divinity School and was the editor of Psychology Today. He was a protege of Paul Tillich and several other people, philosophers and theologians. Beautiful command of the English language, and you'll be hard pressed to. I mean, it's one of those books that you underline the entire book, because every sentence in that book could be a poster, right? The motivational poster, and it's like you could put it on your website. You could get 10,000 quotes out of that book. It's absolutely incredible how dense it is, and it's definitely a book not to sit down and read. To me, it's a book to it's a textbook. It's a textbook on how to be a modern man and how to face these issues in relationship with other men, right? Relationship with women, in relationship with our purpose and calling. And it really is not even a book for men. It's really a book about masculine energy that I think would be equally. I've read feminist books, a number of them, and some of them I don't resonate with. Others I do, because they connect with the feminine energy inside me. Right? I'm not a woman, but I have various. Parts of me, and this book I thought is one that you could recommend to anybody. The one thing about this book is, through my wife, I was able to meet Sam Keen at his house here in Santa Rosa, and he's every bit as lively in person. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago. He was probably in his late 70s. He has a trapeze, like a whole circus trapeze thing that he does, and he lives like on a little, I don't know, it's not a farm, but like a little country house. And he has a little, like in the book, he talks about the cottage that he wrote in, and you can see it, where it is on the land. So what a privilege to read a book and become a fan,
Yes.
and an avid fan, and then meet the author in like a real setting, like not at a book signing, but like at his house, and we spent, I don't know, a couple of hours together. It was a small group of people. So beautiful, and he's the real deal.
Yeah, that's the icing on the cake, to know that they are every bit as good as you imagined them to be. Your admiration wasn't lost on somebody with feet of clay.
Thoughtful, funny, eloquent, insightful, deep thinker, collegial, right? Listen to everybody, what everybody had to say, engaged in conversation. And then I don't know how he kept himself from saying, "I told you so," because we were talking about the political upheaval in America. And he writes in the book 10, 15, 20 years before we have all of this latest stuff and the latest round of wars. He writes about the kinds of things that are happening and what's happening with masculinity and men and relationship with women and substance abuse and everything else. It's really a book that looks far ahead of its time.
Book number 9, Notes on the Death of Culture, Essays on Spectacle and Society, by the Nobel laureate Mario Vargas Llosa.
Yeah, so this is a weird one because I read his other books, like the ones he won the Nobel Prize, like, it's okay, right? It's almost almost like a Paulo Coelho kind of a little too much, and a little too dramatic and a little too, obviously he does a beautiful job with character development and plot and story and all the wonderful things about books. And yeah, who am I to tell anything about his Nobel Prize winning work? But it didn't blow my mind, right? But when I read this little book, it absolutely blew my mind because, again, the theme is the same. It's this courage. It's the courage to say things as they are, the truth telling. And he goes after kind of the popular culture and absolutely dismantles popular culture. And in a way that's not standoffish or elitist, but in a way to say, not everybody can be a writer. Not everybody can be an artist. And we have to have some distinction here. Not everybody can win a trophy, right? We can't almost, to use some of his words, you can't prostitute art. And by making it, it's one thing to make it broadly available, and it's another thing to make more people participate in the process of creating art. And at the same time, not everything is art. And, there was an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal, maybe just a couple of years ago, about Spotify, how 98% of the revenue on Spotify and downloads and views and whatever come from 0.3% of the artists. So in some sense, it's like a new age validation of Mario Vargas Llosa's theory that not everything is art, not everything is culture. And he talks about the diluting and the watering down of talent. And really goes after Hollywood that keeps propping up these, star of the week because there's a machine, right? There's the Harvey Weinstein machine of stardom. And first you got to sleep with Harvey Weinstein, as icky as that is. And then you fall into the machine and they make a star out of you. And then you can't really tell who's the star and who's popular, right? And who's the star because of talent and who's the star because of they just kind of fell into the machine. And now with influencers, you see this, time and again, where, you deal with influencers, you know about this, you're an expert in this, about what it takes to become an influencer. And what I liked about his book is this: be honest with yourself, be truthful to yourself, be discerning in the kind of art you consume, and then ask yourself, what is art and what is not. And by this cheapening of art, we're destroying culture. And I think he's right about that. Now, he also has done unusual things in his life. That could be a topic for a different discussion. But this is it's not a work of fiction, and it's a tour de force, and it's very practical because it talks about the things that you can relate to very easily, and it just gave words to this feeling of revolt that I have about what passes for culture, what passes for talent, what passes for art, what passes for music. In movies and all of that.
Book number 10, Politics of Experience, The Bird of Paradise, R.D. Lang, published in 1967.
Yeah. So there's two parts to this book that I got. One was as a therapist, as a psychiatrist or psychologist. I don't remember which. R.D. Lang, who's also experimented with psychedelics and other things. Two things he talks about. One was generic, right, which is more important to me, which is my experience is unique and idiosyncratic to me, and you have no chance of understanding my experience. And I don't have any chance of understanding your experience. So the best we can do is engage with this sense of respect and empathy and sadness that you will never see my experience and I will never see your experience. But I appreciate that you have an experience that's different from mine. And that's so beautiful and so needed today. Right? It's this respect that
Yes.
I can't understand Leanne Simpson and her colonial imprint. But she can't understand, me being from an indigenous culture. And she's only had, I don't know, in some sense, one oppressor, right? The Canadians. And my people went through the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire twice, the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Nazis, right? And some would even say, whatever, the last 50 years. And now just, so my people went through my people went through their own experience. I, as a member of my people and my indigenous culture, I went through my experience. And it's an invitation not to invalidate anybody else's experience.
Yes, exactly.
That was part one. Part two, very quickly, was he talks about schizophrenics. And he talks about how one way to look at the schizophrenics or seriously ill is to not put so many labels on them and not to drug them, because part of what they're going through could be a journey. That they had a complete breakdown because they couldn't handle anymore the craziness of this world, and they had a breakdown, and they had a breakdown, not like I'm not talking about clinical terms, but like like an ontological breakdown of like, what's the point of living, right? And who am I, and what is this, and this doesn't make sense. And rather than us going out and quickly labeling them as mentally ill, and then taking them out of society, and then drugging them to where we're stopping them in the middle of their journey, and their journey is terrifying. Because they've lost all guideposts. They're in completely different land. They're not even on Mars. They're in different dimensions. And his idea is, can we show empathy to these people and not label them because they're not all gone? And can we be a useful guidepost? And can we tell them, okay, you've suffered a breakdown, and now you're in this space, and it's a scary space, but it's okay. There you can it's okay where you are, right? It's where you are, and here's some guideposts, right? Don't freak out over this, and don't do. It's very practical advice. So I don't know anything about psychology or psychiatry, but he does, and I just thought that it was so beautifully done, where he talked about kind of a generic concept of my experience and your experience versus how it practically applies in the world of his patients that he's dealt with for many years, and how he's been successful in treating some patients and just guiding them on this long journey of reconstructing, kind of the ontological basis for be able to operate in the world without, drugging them and freezing them in place. And again, the theme is courage, that he has the courage to take on the psychiatry and psychology establishment and say, wait a minute, we could be doing this all wrong.
Well, I mean, this is something we should all be adopting, because, we do not know. We don't know. And any one of us could be in the position of, those positions at any time in life. I mean, it's interesting how people do like to take sides. We've got this thing blowing up in England. I don't know if it's made international news, but about, Prince William's godmother, who was the late chief lady in waiting to the Queen, who made some remarks to a woman that had been invited to the palace that were, for the woman, it was very abusive. It struck her very deeply, and it was racism in her book. Now, other people will say, well, we don't know what the fuss is about. She's an old lady. She's grown up in a different time when that kind of behavior was normal. We should, forgive and forget. But, we cannot eradicate the other person's experience. They felt what they felt. but we have to jump in and take sides and comment and judge instead of just allowing it to be.
So this is a tiny little book. You can read it in an evening, but you'll probably read it again if you read it once, because it's packed full of just a different perspective, said so gently. He speaks gently. The message is forceful, but the language is gentle, and it's not from a position of authority. It's from a position of, here's what I've observed. It seems to me as if it's a little different than Alan Watts, right? Which I love Alan Watts, but I didn't. That would have been the 11th, right, book, but I couldn't pick which one I wanted more.
Certainly a book that ought to be given to children in school.
Yeah, it's simple, easy read, and it gives an example of a regular person, a person who has, by our standards, by our labeling, serious mental issues, and how it's the same issues. And I think to me, it's like a book in empathy, without ever mentioning the word empathy specifically.
So that's your 10 books. Do you see the thread that I see through these books? I mean, you've got so many different cultures, nationalities, and we come at the end of it, we're not talking about nationality, we're talking about personality or whatever, but it's the same thing that, we really have to learn to understand where other people are coming from, or at least accept, that they have a right.
Right.
Yeah. It's a very interesting, eclectic mix, your list.
Thank you. These are, the theme for me is, as far as the writers, is two things. One is they really focus on truth telling, right? So there's no drama in these books. There's no spinning. There's no pushing. There's no persuasion. There's no, there's no literary devices, political devices. They're just saying it like they see it. From so many different perspectives, and some more gently, some more forcefully, but one is the power of observation, which many of us are missing and could cultivate more. The other one is the courage to say it like it is, and the third one is to say it in a beautiful way, right? And for anybody who's tried to write something, you try to write it like this. Right, and some write in flowery language like Sam Keen, right? Some write in spiritual, kind of metaphorical, mystical language like Ibn Arabi. Others are very mechanical and clinical, but really, really hats off to the authors. The one thing that comes through is that they put their heart and soul into this, and they really wanted to say something, and they took the time to say it just right. It'd be hard pressed to clip parts out. I don't know how many books I read saying this could have been a 30-page, but this could have been an article. It would have been a beautiful article. He just took a wonderful article and ruined it by writing a book.
Yeah. So of all these authors, if you had the opportunity to take one of them to lunch, who would it be?
Oof. Well, one I already had lunch with. That's Sam Keen. Yeah, it would. Maybe it would be Leanne Simpson. I would just love to hear more. There's very few things about her online. She writes some music also. She's given a few speeches, but I'd love to just spend more time with her. And there's a spiritual source of courage that she's encapsulated in words so beautiful. She's written several other books. She has another book, I forgot the name, but the subtitle is A Cure for White Ladies, which I thought is great. But just to get closer to this sense of where is this courage coming from?
Yes. And
when was the moment? Where were you born with this? Did you discover this? Did you, where did you find the courage to say things the way you say them?
Yeah. That's the thing that always gets me is, how did this develop in you?
Yeah.
Speaking of which, you're a rebel entrepreneur, you're a wisdom activist. I mean, you've done so many things, professor, engineer, investment banker, earth lawyer, people coach, inventor. Where did all that arise within you, and how?
I was born with a lot of energy, thank God, and an insatiable curiosity. I went to law school late in life. I was 40, and I only went to law school because one of my friends I always wanted to do it. I just never could do it. And a friend of mine told me that he just went to law school at 40, which I didn't know. I thought he'd been a lawyer for 30 years. And I thought, well, if you can do it, I can do it. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, is learning the British culture, basically, right? And the American culture through law, and kind of the logic and the thinking and the emotion, kind of how society is organized and all of that. And I just remember just having a ball and just being so sad that at the time I had 4 kids and a job and everything else. I couldn't really devote myself truly to it. But it's this sense of curiosity. And the sense of curiosity is that sadness of the warrior, in seeing that, seeing the possibility of making the world work for everyone and seeing it very clearly. And then the frustration of not having the tools, the skills, the eloquence, the network, the resources to do it at scale, right? So I do as much as I can in my companies, in my organizations, in nonprofits, in my family, with my own failings, of course, like everybody else. But but the driver behind it is this sadness that we know we can make this work better for everybody. We know that so many of us are losing here. As a matter of fact, all of us. I haven't met one winner yet. I've met winners in business, right? I've met winners in fame. I've met billionaires. I've met everybody, but kind of as a whole human being, I can't point to one that says, okay, that person is winning and the rest of us are losing. So I think we're kind of stuck in a lose-lose game, and that just bothers me at a spiritual level, bothers me as an engineer. Like, this is a problem we can solve, and we're not solving it.
Maybe the Dalai Lama.
Maybe so, but he's a refugee from his own country, right? It's, perhaps he could have done, I wonder if he goes to sleep at night thinking, like, should I have organized resistance against the Chinese and preserve the freedom of my people? Maybe it was impossible. I don't know. But this is what I wonder, whether he wonders.
And I don't know which end it is. I don't know whether the screen froze then, Elvir.
I was still moving, so I don't know if it's
you were still moving, so it must have been at my end. Okay, good. That's fine. We don't want to lose you. We don't mind losing me. Of all the things that you do, all the things that you've done, what gives you the most joy?
Being with my family and with friends and discussing these topics. Right, teaching them how to engaging in discussion with my family and my friends, engaging in discussion of how do we make our daily lives better. Right, it's fun to talk about philosophy and sports and politics and movies and whatever, but at the end of the day, what does it take to have our daily lives work better? You might be frozen again. Yes, Sandie, it appears that you're frozen and I'm still there. So I'm happy to do the sign off for you, but there you are.
There I am. Yes. We've got such awful weather here at the moment. I think it's interfering. At least that's my excuse. So I missed a lot of what you said then, but I don't believe that we've missed recording it. So I can go back and listen, and our viewers still get what they need to get from it. Before we close, just tell me a little bit about Upend, a new school of living wisdoms. What are you doing there? What are you offering?
Sure. So the idea at Upend is to collect the people who have been my teachers, right, as a seed, as a start. But it's really a teachers collective to provide, to build a community, a wisdom sharing community, where we gather these kinds of things and discuss these kinds of topics, and where we talk about, reciprocity and courage and patience and balance, and we engage in a very practical today world. How do you build these ancient wisdom teachings and indigenous wisdom teachings into our daily lives? So we have courses, we have free events, we have, it's basically a nonprofit. It's how it's set up. But the idea is to engage the broader community in talking about wisdom skills from time immemorial.
Very good. I'll check that out. Now, final question. What are you reading now?
I'm reading Gabor Mate's new book on the myth of normal.
Is it good?
It's very good.
Okay. That obviously hasn't appeared on anybody's list yet, but I'm sure it will do.
That's right. It will soon.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Elvir Causevic, thank you so much for adding your 10 best list to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
We've enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about Dr. Elvir Causevic's work and all of the different things that he's doing at his websites, upend.com and Elvir, ELVIR.me. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back again at the same time next week with another 10 best spiritual books list to share with you. Till then, it's goodbye from me. And thank you again to Dr. Elvir Causevic.
Thank you very much.